There is a feeling you already know, but have probably never named. It is the feeling of having shared something too important with the wrong person. It was not a dramatic betrayal. There was no fight, no visible consequence, but something changed. Something that was yours stopped being. As if a part of you had left through your mouth and never come back. You felt lighter for a moment, and then inexplicably emptier. That has a name. The Stoics called it dispersion, the act of sending outward what should have remained within. And they understood something that modern culture has completely forgotten. Not everything that is yours needs to be shared. In fact, some things only exist with full strength while they remain in silence. We live in an era that glorifies exposure, that confuses transparency with virtue, that treats silence as arrogance and privacy, as something to hide. But the greatest Stoics in history, men who governed empires, faced exile, lost everything and rebuilt, had one practice in common that no motivational post ever mentions. They protected the interior, with discipline, with awareness, with choice. If you are here, you have probably already felt the cost of speaking too much. You have already lived the weight of having exposed something that should have been kept. Write in the comments one word, just one, that describes how you feel when you realize you told someone something you should not have. That feeling has an origin, and it has a solution. 7 things, 7 domains of your life that the Stoics protected with conscious silence. Not out of fear, not out of dishonesty, out of wisdom. Let's begin. Number 1, your goals before you achieve them. You have a dream, a project, a goal that has not left the page yet, and there is an almost physical impulse to tell someone. That is not weakness. It is human. The mind seeks validation, the way the body seeks food, instinctively, automatically, without asking permission. But here is what almost no one notices. When you share a goal before achieving it, your brain registers part of the satisfaction as if the accomplishment had already happened. This is not metaphor. It is real neurological functioning. And the result is subtle but devastating. You lose a fraction of the hunger you would need to actually get there. Seneca wrote in his letters something that sounds simple but carries unusual depth. Recogite inter ips. Gather yourself within yourself, not as isolation, as preservation. The energy that goes outward in the form of words is energy that stops going forward in the form of action. Think of a fire. While the flame is contained, it warms, it illuminates, it sustains. But when you open the space too wide, when the wind enters without control, the flames scatter, the heat is lost. The fire weakens not because it ran out of wood, but because it was exposed too soon. Your goals are the fire. Silence is the space that keeps them alive. Isabel is 34 years old, a designer, and spent 2 years talking about the creative studio she was going to open. She told her family at the holiday dinner. She told her friends in the group chat. She told co-workers over coffee. Every time she shared it, she received a smile, a "that's amazing," a "you're going to crush it." And every time she received that response, the urgency dropped a little. The project moved to next month, then next quarter. Then it became a story about what she was planning to do someday. The studio never opened, not for lack of talent, for lack of hunger. And the hunger was consumed by the words that should have fueled the action. What you call enthusiasm when sharing your plans is almost always the beginning of their unraveling. Guard the goal. Show the result. My projects grow in silence. I present them when they are ready, not while they are still being born. Number 2, your inner struggles and personal fears. Let me ask you something directly. The last time you exposed a genuine fear to someone, what happened afterward? At best, you received comfort, a verbal embrace, an encouraging phrase. You've got this. And for a few hours you felt better, but the fear came back, alone, intact, as if the conversation had not truly touched it, only passed over it. At worst, the information became ammunition, not necessarily out of malice, sometimes out of carelessness, sometimes out of envy disguised as concern, sometimes because people use what they know about you without even realizing They are using it. Chrysippus, the philosopher who systematized Stoicism with near mathematical precision, taught that emotions not processed rationally become passions that dominate instead of serve, and that the work of transforming a fear into strength is internal work, non-transferable. It is not completed in conversation with another. It is completed in confrontation with yourself. This does not mean solitude. It means selectivity. There is an enormous difference between seeking genuine support from someone who has the real capacity to help and distributing vulnerability to relieve momentary pressure. The first is wisdom. The second is dispersion. Gregory is 47 years old, an attorney, and had carried for years a fear he could barely name. The fear of not being intelligent enough for the level he had reached. Imposter syndrome, they would call it today. But for him, it was simply a constant, low voice that accompanied every important meeting. At a certain point, at a dinner with colleagues after a few drinks, he told them. He thought he would free himself. He thought he would feel less alone in it. What happened was different. In the months that followed, he noticed subtle shifts. A colleague who used to ask for his opinion began doing so less frequently. Another started making light jokes about Gregory who doubts himself. Nothing serious, nothing confrontable. But the atmosphere changed. He did not lose his job. He lost something harder to recover, the image of solidity he had built with years of work. You abandon yourself when you hand your fears to people who do not have the tools to care for them. Fight your inner battles internally. Win them internally. And then, if you wish, tell the story of the victory. My inner struggles are my territory. I face them. I do not distribute them. Number 3, your achievements. Before they are consolidated, here is a truth that will seem counterintuitive at first read. Sharing an achievement too early can destroy it. Not because people will act against you, though that also happens, but because premature exposure changes your own relationship with what you accomplished. Cleanthes, the second leader of the Stoic school, a man who carried water at night to pay for his studies during the day, said that virtue only consolidates in the silence of repeated practice. That announcing progress before it is rooted is like pulling a plant from the soil to show someone the roots. It stops growing the moment you expose it. Think of a seed. Underground in the dark with no one watching. It is doing the most important work of its existence. Building roots, creating structure, preparing what will sustain everything that comes after. If you dig it up before it is ready, just to show that something is growing, it does not go back. The process was interrupted. What should have been foundation became exhibition. Andrea is 39 years old, an entrepreneur, and when her business showed real signs of growth for the first time, she told everyone. Family, friends, former colleagues. She posted on social media. She celebrated out loud. And then the first difficult month came. Inevitable in any business. Normal, correctable, temporary, but now there was an audience. There were expectations installed. There were people waiting. For the next chapter of the success story, she herself had announced, the pressure from outside combined with the pressure from within created a level of anxiety that led her to make hasty decisions. Decisions that delayed by 2 years the growth that could have come naturally. The achievement did not die, but it paid the cost of premature exposure. Let the roots grow in the dark. Show the tree when it can already hold its own weight. My achievements consolidate before they are announced. The root comes before the display. Number 4, your spiritual life and deepest beliefs. There is a dimension of you that is by nature untranslatable, not because it is secret, but because some inner experiences lose precision the moment they try to become words for others. Marcus Aurelius, who governed the greatest empire in the world and still wrote his deepest reflections in a journal, never meant to be published, understood this with rare clarity. The meditations were not for an audience. They were a conversation with himself, with what he called the inner daimon, the highest, most silent, most truthful part of himself. He did not preach his philosophy in the public squares. He did not summon senators to hear his beliefs. He lived them, and he recorded for himself what he lived, because he knew that a true belief does not need an audience to be real, and that when it seeks an audience, it frequently stops being belief and becomes performance. Stephen is 51 years old, an engineer, and went through a profound inner transformation after a surgery he nearly did not survive. Not religious in the conventional sense, a complete internal reorganization about what mattered, about time, about presence. For several months, he kept it to himself. He lived differently. He chose differently. He felt differently. Then he began to share. With his wife, with his children, with close friends. He wanted to pass on what he had discovered. The reactions were varied. Skepticism disguised as concern, light jokes about Stephen who became a philosopher, questions that were not curiosity. They were tests. He did not lose the transformation, but he lost something of its purity. He began to hear himself explaining instead of living, defending instead of practicing. What you call sharing your spiritual journey is sometimes the beginning of your spirituality becoming concept instead of practice. What is sacred to you does not need approval to be real, nor an audience to have value. My inner life is the most precious territory I possess. I live it. I do not present it. Number 5, your conflicts and disagreements with other people. This is where most people make mistakes most frequently. And with the best intentions, you have a conflict with someone, a disagreement, a hurt, a tension, and you need to process it. That is human, necessary, legitimate, but there is a critical difference between processing and distributing. When you bring a conflict to a third person, you are not simply asking for support. You are involuntarily recruiting a judge, creating an informal tribunal where the other party has no right of defense, building a one-sided narrative that solidifies every time it is repeated. And the most subtle part, you are giving a third-person information about both sides of a relationship that they did not need to have. Posidonius, a Stoic philosopher who studied human and social dynamics deeply, taught that harmony between people depends on each person's ability to resolve what is theirs without contaminating the common field. That the gossip is not merely weak, they are an agent of social disorder who rarely perceives the damage they cause. Think of a fire. When you distribute a conflict to others, you are not putting out the flames. You are spreading sparks. And each person who receives a spark carries a little of it into other contexts, other moments, other conversations. The original conflict may even be resolved, but the sparks keep flying. Camille is 36 years old, a therapist, which makes her story especially revealing, and for years had the habit of processing work conflicts with close friends. Nothing serious, just venting about difficult colleagues, unfair situations, day-to-day tensions. What she only realized years later, the group of friends had built fixed, negative images of the people she had vented about. People Camille later reconciled with, moved past, even became close to, but who remained as villains in an old narrative for her friends. She had created, without meaning to, a permanent archive of the worst moments of people who were part of her life. Resolve your conflicts with whoever created them. What needs to be said? Say it to the right person. My conflicts are resolved where they were born. I do not distribute them, I face them. Number 6, your finances and material situation. This is the domain where silence has the most concrete and immediate consequences, and yet it is where people speak with the most ease. Epictetus, who lived as a slave before being freed, and then taught philosophy with an authority that emperors respected, had absolute clarity about the relationship between what you possess and what you expose, not because money was more important than virtue, but because he understood that exposing your material situation creates dependencies, expectations, and power dynamics that rarely favor the person who exposes. When you tell people you are doing well financially, you change how they will ask favors of you. It changes what they expect at dinners, trips, gifts. It changes the perception of who deserves what in the circles where you move. When you tell people you are struggling financially, you change how they perceive you professionally. It changes the opportunities that reach you. It changes the trust they place in you for projects, partnerships, responsibilities. In both cases, the information works against you. Helen is 43 years old, a university professor, and when she received an unexpected inheritance, she told people close to her, not out of vanity, out of closeness, out of trust, out of that feeling that keeping a secret from people you love seems like dishonesty. In the 2 years that followed, she counted the costs, loan requests that created awkwardness, friendships that became strained when she said no, a new dynamic in old relationships that never fully returned to what they had been. The money did not corrupt her. The exposure of the money corrupted some of the relationships. Your financial situation is strategic information. Treat it with the seriousness it deserves. My material situation is private. It does not define my worth, and it does not need to be known to be real. Number 7, your good deeds and acts of generosity. This is the last one, and perhaps the hardest to accept, because it goes against something that seems virtuous. Aurelius taught that genuine virtue does not seek a witness, that the good done in silence carries a different weight, cleaner, purer, more true than the good done with an audience. Marcus Aurelius recorded in the Meditations something I hold as one of the most precise principles in all of Stoic philosophy. When you do something good, do not look for applause, not because you do not deserve recognition, but because when a good action needs an audience, it stops being a good action and becomes a social investment. And social investments carry an expected return. And expected returns generate frustration when they do not arrive. The good done in silence is unconditional. The good that is announced carries embedded conditions, even when you do not notice them. Benjamin is 29 years old, a musician, and has a genuinely generous heart. When he helped someone, financially, with his time, with his work, there was an almost automatic impulse to mention it in conversation, not crudely, subtly. I helped so-and-so with that last week, just mentioning it, just leaving it on record. What he realized, in a rare moment of honesty with himself, is that the mention came from a place of insecurity, a need to be seen as good, and that this need, however understandable, made his kindness conditional. When he stopped mentioning it, something shifted. The generosity became lighter, cleaner, more his. You abandon yourself when you need a witness to feel good enough. The kindness that needs no audience is the only kind that belongs completely to you. I do good because it is who I am, not because someone is watching. When you guard your goals before achieving them, you preserve the hunger that makes them possible. When you face your inner struggles without distributing them, you transform vulnerability into strength instead of handing it over as weakness. When you let your achievements consolidate before announcing them, you build roots that can hold the weight of what comes after. When you protect your spiritual life and your deepest beliefs, you keep intact what no outside opinion should ever touch. When you resolve your conflicts with whoever created them, you preserve the field around them and the relationships that depend on it. When you treat your financial situation as strategic information, you remove a variable that rarely works in your favor when exposed. And when you practice goodness without an audience, you discover that unconditional generosity has a quality that performed generosity will never have. Silence is not absence. It is architecture. It is the conscious decision that not everything that is yours needs to be distributed to be real, that some things exist with more strength, more purity, more power when they remain within you. Life changes in quality when you stop needing others to see what you are and simply begin to be it. You started this video with a word, the word that described how you feel when you realize you told someone something you should not have. Now I leave you with a different question. And I want you to carry it with you after this video ends. Of the 7 things we explored today, which one have you been handing to the wrong people? And what silent cost has that been charging you? You do not need to answer here. You need to answer for yourself, because that answer is the beginning of a practice, not of closure or isolation, of preserving what is genuinely yours. Speak less about your life. Live more deeply inside it.